Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Corporate Messaging That Makes a Difference. We'll give everyone a few minutes to get into the webinar, to log in. So while we're waiting, we love seeing where everyone is from, where everyone's joining from. So if you want to drop in the chat where you're coming in from, that'd be awesome.
Nolan's.
Nice. Chicago. All right, Midwest.
Delray Beach. That person's in my backyard. Miami.
Nashville. Wow, couple from Nashville.
London.
Nice. So we got an international crowd. I'm sitting in Israel. We have London. We have all of the time zones, it sounds like. Amazing. Oh, Sweden. Great.
Look, there's Indianapolis.
Ah, Indianapolis, the best city in the world. Sorry, everyone else. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so while we're here, so we do have a poll. So let's, we just wanted to, see, just again, like while we're waiting for people to join, the poll question is, how much control do you or your team have over the messaging strategy of the organization that you represent? So we'll give everyone a couple minutes to do this poll. We're just waiting for everyone to sign in. Oh, wow, 95%.
That's good. I love it.
Wow, these numbers are really coming in. This is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see. And the person who said 95%, I hope they're the PR person in the organization.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna end the poll. We're gonna see what the responses were in a couple of seconds here. Wow, we got a really great turnout for this one. 70% participation. It's a great metric. Okay, let's look at those results. So Jennifer, if you can see it, everyone else can see it. So it looks like we got 44% are saying some, and then 42% saying I mostly control the messaging, but work with others. And then we got 14% or 5 people here were saying full control, I build all of the messaging. So, wow, did you expect to see that kind of a response, Jennifer? Or,
Yeah, I actually did. I would love to see a higher percentage under full control, but yeah, that's about what I expected. That's why I advocate and do what I do, to elevate our profession so we have more control over the messaging.
That's so important. And, we're really going to delve deep into that. So, if we go on to the next slides, let's just go in. So for everyone, again, who just joined, welcome. Thanks for being here. And again, just in case there's someone here that isn't aware, we're going over corporate messaging that really makes a difference. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Eitan Goldstein. I'm the communications manager for Propel PRM. I use the platform every day, and I get earned media coverage for the company just all across the media landscape. I previously worked at GKPR, one of the premier PR tech firms here in Israel, where I'm based currently. If you saw me a couple of weeks ago when it was light out, it's because I was in the beautiful city of Indianapolis, and now I'm in the beautiful city of Tel Aviv. So there at that firm, I represented companies everywhere from seed stage to Fortune 100. And before this, I was a senior editor at Ynet News, the English language edition of Israel's largest newspaper. And now we have with us Jennifer Hudson, who's the president of Think Beyond Public Relations. Jennifer is on a mission to change the world one PR pro at a time, as she just said. As a strategic communications advocate, trainer, mentor, consultant, speaker, her superpower is helping PR leaders step boldly into their role as the trusted advisor every organization needs. During her 25-year career in corporate communications, Jennifer has always sought to broaden the role of public relations. She leads trainings and workshops on core values, vision, and mission, strategic communications planning, and corporate messaging. Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. You're welcome. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. So if we go on to the next slide, we'll just have a short little agenda, we are going to do some introductions, which we just did. We're going to talk a little bit more about Think Beyond Public Relations and how that's helping to change the media landscape and how it is helping to change, the way that PR pros, think about what they do. And after that, we're going to talk about some of the data findings that we at Propel have found surrounding different kinds of corporate messaging. So yeah, let's kick it off. Well, first, a tiny little bit about Propel. As I'm sure you all know, Propel is the most innovative, differentiated PR software on the market. It was built by our CEO, Zach Cutler, who founded it in 2019 after running his own PR agency for about 10 years, and realized that there was no technological solution that really fit what he was looking for. So in true entrepreneurial fashion, instead of waiting for someone else to do it, he built it himself. And now here we are. It's a great way it's a fantastic way, in my opinion, to manage campaigns, journalist relationships, team productivity, and business outcomes. So anyone who's new to Propel or interested in learning more but hasn't gotten around to it, we're doing an end of the month special that I wanted to let everyone know about. Anyone here today who books a quick platform demo by the end of the month is automatically eligible for 15% off of your subscription if you choose to get started with our platform or any of our tools. So I am going to share a link in the chat momentarily where you can get this 15% off, which is pretty nice. And there it is. All right, so that's enough promotion from our end. So, let's talk about Think Beyond Public Relations. I would love to, if you could, Jennifer, start by giving some background about your experience in the industry and, a few of your programs that you offer that, really help get PR to that next level in terms of corporate communications.
Yeah, so my background is in corporate communications. I started my career in CorpCom at American Airlines in 1995. I was a Spanish-speaking spokesperson for the airline, and I also managed communications for Sabre, the travel technology arm of the company. And in that role at both American and Sabre, and later at British Airways, which is what brought me to South Florida, I always had access to senior leaders, one, and every department in the organization, which is why I believe it's so important for us to have our fingers in all of those pies, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about who is most capable, most likely to hold organizations accountable, to ensure that the messaging that we put out into the world is an accurate reflection of what's happening inside the organization. And I don't know that there's anybody better than the communications folks to do that. We should always be doing the environmental scanning, always have our finger on the pulse of what's happening socio-economically, politically, all of the issues that impact not only our company, but the industry and the world. And I just don't know who's better equipped to do that than communications folks. So after I left Sabre, British Airways came calling. I was vice president of communications for BA, overseeing Latin America, the Caribbean, and Southeast USA. I've been working as a consultant for a number of years since then. And my sweet spot is in strategic communications planning. And just like the founders of Propel PR, I started seeing these gaps that needed filling one in strategic communications planning and understanding of what we call RPI, research planning, implementation, evaluation, and how that should really guide everything that we do. And then also in core values, vision, and mission, when I would talk to my clients about their core values and where they actually showed up in their organization, they were all often left like, huh? They hadn't thought about how to operationalize those core values to make them real. And we see the impacts of that, during times of crisis for organizations. Like, how do we decide how to position ourselves? And I believe that the way that you decide that is to always lean into core values. So we'll talk about that as well a little bit later, I'm sure. But and so I train. I believe so powerfully in elevating the public relations profession. Beyond, we are excellent at media relations. I want us to be excellent at strategic communications that impact the entire organization. And so the training that I do in strategic communications planning for PR pros is designed to address that. The training that I do in teaching PR pros how to facilitate corporate messaging sessions is designed to do that. The training that I do for core values within organizations is designed to do that as well. So that's what I'm passionate about, ensuring that no matter what we do, we always think of ourselves in a broader capacity and a broader role, because that's where I believe we become the trusted advisors that organizations really need. And if you're a consultant, it helps you make more money because you're demonstrating a greater value to the organization beyond just the media piece. And the media piece is important, but it's not all that we do.
Right, and we're definitely going to go into more of those core values pretty soon. But it's so true what you say. We are the ones as in PR or corporate communications, be it internal corporate communications, external communications, that really shape the views of others about our organizations and ourselves. And it's so important to have that really that zoomed out look to make sure, okay, is everything that I'm doing really progressing what we stand for and what we need, what we want to put forth out into the world, besides just the product, but from who we are as a company. And in getting into that, one of the things that we're starting to see are, in terms of corporate messaging data findings, are different types is how people are pitching it, how PR pros are pitching these subjects to the outside world, primarily in media, because that's the data we have, but just also we're seeing it, I'm sure everyone's seeing this in the news or just within their own organizations. So Propel actually looked at 4,600 pitches, a little bit more actually, 4,676 pitches that were sent over the past couple of years that specifically dealt with a few different topics. They dealt with we looked into ESG, we looked into DE&I, we looked into Pride and how people were pitching Pride Month, for instance. And so going to the next slide, we can see that ESG corporate messaging has skyrocketed in 2002, just by leaps and bounds.
22.
Sorry, thank you, 2022, just by leaps and bounds. You can see that you're looking at an over 400% increase in just a couple of years. Now, just so everyone understands, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And when looking into where this comes from, we have to look at, what does the investment world look like today, and who are the main investors? And we see that Gen Z is really pushing this forward. Gen Z is coming into its own. Basically, anyone born 1996 and after, they're really coming up to be the wealth managers. It's their time to take the reins, basically, from us, the millennials, and so, their way that they invest is a little bit different than perhaps millennials, definitely Gen Xers and boomers. So instead of looking specifically at, what is a company doing and is it profitable, Gen Z is really pushing, and we're seeing this across the board, just in terms of investments, they're looking into value. They're looking into what are the values that a particular company has. You know, do they have environmental sustainability goals? Do they have specific social goals that they want to achieve? You know, what's their governance look like? What is their how transparent of a company are they? So what that's leading to is not only just not only a change in how people are investing, but it's leading to a change in funds with a lot of different ESG funds, where fund managers will cobble together different companies into mutual funds that have certain ESG factors into them. Do they have a high ESG score? This is really a big trend that's coming in the world of investment. So of course, as part of our job as PR professionals, and including investment relations professionals, which I hope that they're okay with me, lumping us all in together, is we have to push as well. What are their ESG factors? If we're pushing them if the goal of the company that we represent or organization that we're in or whatever is looking for new investment, well, investors are now looking for, well, what's your ESG score? What are you guys doing in terms of governance, in terms of your environmental impact, in terms of your social impact? And it's really changing the way that messaging is happening in certain aspects. But it's not only for the investment side, also on the PR side. The public wants to see and the average consumer is starting to buy based upon, does this company fit my values? All things being equal, will I go for company X or company Y? Well, if company Y fits my values and company X, doesn't, then I'm going to go for company Y. And so a lot more companies are starting to, be more forward and open about what their different values are. And so, I had a quick question. I have some questions, of course, for you, Jennifer. I'd love to hear your thoughts about not only my questions, but this ESG in general. My first question is, do you feel that ESG messaging is being pitched more now?
I don't, you would be better equipped to answer that question than I, but if the numbers are showing that, there are likely reasons for it. We also talked about ESG, diversity, equity, inclusion as a part of ESG. I think that investors, as you say, and I don't know that Gen Z is actually investing in a big way right now. Millennials, Gen Xers are certainly asking these questions. Do your values as an organization align with my own? But it's very important to Gen Z as well. And when they do begin investing, they will be asking those questions, and companies know it. There are questions as well about the way you determine a company's ESG score, how objectively those scores are being determined and meted out. So we have to think about it in those terms as well. But one thing I know is true, that accountability is real and important to current and future consumers, and they will want to know that who they're purchasing from aligns with their values. And so how these stories are being pitched, I'm not sure how they're being pitched. I'm not sure what the angles are. But what is always true about media relations, what has always been true about media relations will always remain true about media relations. And that is that a good story that is well-founded and well-researched, you're a former journalist, you know this, will get the interest of a reporter, right? So if there is an increase in ESG stories that are being pitched and reporters are opening and listening to and writing stories based on those pitches, then that could be an indication, as we always should do, that we could perhaps tie our stories about diversity, equity, inclusion into an ESG, with an ESG component as well. We talked about this a bit earlier, but anyway, to answer your question, I'm not sure that, why there's an increase. I will just say that if there is an increase and you are pitching these kinds of stories, it's incumbent upon PR professionals to ensure that the real internal and external lived experiences of the organization accurately reflect what you're pitching. And so are we holding ourselves truly accountable? Are we attaching budget to the issues that we say that we are passionate about, to the issues that we say we're addressing? I always think, you follow the money trail to determine where the real impact is. So it's not, it's important to tell the world about the work that we're doing, but that work has to be meaningful, and it has to be, it has to be tied to the organization's core values and operationalized in a real, and those values have to be operationalized in a real way. I've probably gone way beyond answering what you wanted me to answer, but
No, it's great. I love it. And I'm sure our audience does too. Yes, so yes, we are going to be sharing the recording, by the way. Sorry, someone just asked that in the chat. So I have another follow-up question for you.
sure.
There are those that say companies should avoid this kind of ESG messaging because it just gets you to wade into a quagmire. You're all of a sudden you come out and say, well, we love puppies and we are going to build and we're doing all this good for puppies. And then someone on Twitter will go, well, what about the kittens? So you can't please everybody all the time. And there are certain people that say, just forget about ESG messaging, forget about this, promoting your core values, because there's always going to be someone that gets upset and people read the negative reviews more than the positive reviews. So what would you say to someone that would say that as a response to, push to promoting your ESG messaging?
Well, I think, just like we talked about earlier, consumers are demanding that companies step up. It's no longer enough to sit by the sidelines and not take a stand on issues. So that's one. I also personally believe that companies have a responsibility as corporate citizens to take a stand on issues. But more importantly, if you have, as an organization, identified what you stand for, your core values, and they also, when you establish your core values, they not only speak to what you stand for, but what you do not. And so if you're leaning into those in a very real way, and I keep saying this, but operationalizing those core values, attaching budget to them so that they're meaningful. And what I mean by that is, I gave this example earlier, that if you say that you value customer service, but you're not investing in customer service training for your employees, how much do you really believe in that value? If you say that you stand for creating inclusive environments for your staff, but you haven't reimagined your job descriptions and your hiring practices and invested the time and money and people and resources to do that, how real is that value for you? And so I believe that as long as an organization is accurately, authentically reflecting its core values in the work that it does, it should not be afraid to speak out on issues. If you're walking the talk, there's no, and then of course, our role as PR people is to decide the kinds of issues. That's what issues management is all about, right? It's to decide the kind of issues on which we will take a stance or which we will not take a stance. I just had this happen with a client of mine. An article came out in the New York Times. We had to debate whether or not the organization should respond. The industry, the market was sort of demanding it. Why aren't you speaking out on this? We want to hear from you about this. If you say that you're about XYZ, why aren't you speaking out? And so those are whoever our target consumers, audiences, if you're a nonprofit, it might be donors, funders, whatever, when they are looking to you to take real action, then you have to take that action. But it's important to decide on which issues you will speak as an organization, and then create the messaging that's attached to that. But I know this isn't a conversation about issues management, but
I mean, listen, but issues management has to do with ESG, so I think it fits in really well.
It's an issue.
And I think that this is another question that a lot of people listening might have is, how involved should the PR professional be when it comes to helping to craft those values? You might be an external PR agent, you might be working for a PR firm representing a company. for someone in that kind of a position, it might be a little bit more, they might feel a little bit more uncomfortable, I should say,
Mhm.
going to a company and saying, hey, you're a startup, yeah, you're seed or you're A, but maybe these should be your values, or like you should look into it. But or even coming from in-house, if you're in a smaller company or even a bigger company, a PR person might say, well, I don't know if that's necessarily my role to express like, hey, this is what we should be talking about. How do you see like the PR and the management working together to build those relationships and to build that messaging?
Yeah, when we've been placed in what I call the PR equals media box, it can be a little scary to break out of it. But I think it's incumbent upon us to do it, and this is why. I've spent a lot of time thinking about who inside companies, inside organizations are really uniquely positioned to help hold leaders accountable, to understand what keeps employees up at night, what keeps them happy, how their work is tying into the goals of the organization. And I've thought, well, is it HR? Sometimes in organizations, HR is highly regulatory. They might only be involved in the hiring and sometimes their benefits. Finance is worried about the money. Legal has its particular focus. There is no one as uniquely situated to do this work as PR professionals. And we talk about the environmental scanning that we should always be doing as PR professionals. And if we're doing that, we are constantly talking to multiple staff in our departments. We are keep staying abreast of what's happening in the marketplace on issues that impact our organization. It is incumbent upon us to do that work so that we can be that voice within organizations. And in one of the workshops that I do, Earn the Seat, we talk specifically about how to get the ear of senior leaders so that you can elevate your role. I just sometimes people say, how dare you speak out about a certain issue? This just came up at a conference I went to yesterday. Someone was saying, how dare you speak out about this particular issue? And then, the response was, how dare I not? In my role as in corporate communications at British Airways, for example, I was responsible for Latin America and the Caribbean. We were a tiny market in the grand scheme of things for British Airways. And at the time, leaders in our organization hadn't even been to our region in years. And so it was my role to advocate for the hard work that these people were doing, just as hard work as people were doing in London and other places around the country, around the world. It was, their work and their contributions were just as important. And it's just important for us to be the eyes and ears of the organization. I really feel that strongly. Maybe I'm curious what people think in the chat. If you are hired to do media relations, and I will say this, even when I was hired by clients who thought they needed media relations, when I walked in and showed them the process of the way that I work, and that process is research, planning, implementation, evaluation, I would say to them, it's going to help you close gaps and determine where you actually need to invest money in your communications. Yes, it may be media relations, but it may also be in your employee communications. It may be in community relations. It may be in joining outside organizations and pitching, executive visibility opportunities for your executives. But that process and we may end up deciding, yeah, media relations is the channel where we should invest most of our time. But there may always also be opportunities to invest in other, what I call channels in the toolbox. And so I just, like you said at the beginning, my goal is to elevate our profession and to change the world one PR pro at a time. And I think the way that we do that is by seeing ourselves as bigger than the boxes in which we're often placed. And, so I'm getting on my soapbox now. I'm sorry. That's work.
No, it's okay. That's why we had you on. You have really interesting messages, and it's a lot of food for thought. Like how to really deal with that interpersonal between this, you and the C-suite, between
And you
you
know
and the
what?
rest of the company, and get
I will,
the messaging right down to what it needs to be, so that everyone in the organization is happy and that they're pushing out what they truly want to say.
and I will tell you, Eitan, that when you do this work, when you actually dig in and do the research and understand the organization intimately, even as an outside consultant, the stories you pitch are so much richer. I had one client, an architecture client, who had very, very discerning clients who didn't want stories about the beautiful works that were being designed and built for them. They didn't want them in the media. And so I'm like, okay, you hired me, you thought to do media relations, but we can't talk about your product. We can't talk about the work that you're doing. And so because I went in doing that kind of due diligence, I was able to pitch other types of stories about the work of the organization that had nothing to do with their, like, profile pieces and business story pieces. So going through that process just makes you that much more of a skilled communicator for media pitches as well.
Right. So I'm just going to get on to the next slide, but we have a great question just to change the background a little bit. We've been looking at a great background.
Yeah.
Now it's some more details. So we can see, a little bit more on ESG, that we really started measuring it around November 2020. As you can see, there are about 100 pitches then. Then over the course of 2022 is when it really started picking up again. And we had a lot in August, and obviously we don't have too much for November and December. Now with that change of scenery, I wanted to kind of shift tracks with the questions. We actually got a really interesting question in the chat. What do you recommend doing if you, let's say, I've experienced this myself, I'm sure you have, when an organization says, like, okay, like, well, that's not your job. Like, I know, for instance, I was asking an organization about a certain, how a certain thing that they wanted to push out, really, how does that promote their core business and their core values? And they said, why do you care? Your job is PR. Just get me into New York Times.
Oh
So
my
when you
gosh.
come across someone like that, which I think that many of us have come across, like,
Yeah.
what's the best way of from the PR associate all the way up, I guess, to the owner of the PR firm, how do you think would be a good way to kind of manage that type of a relationship?
Yeah, if you're already in it, there's a process to getting out of it, and that requires professional development on your part to understand so that you can. And I really, really believe strongly in the communications planning framework of research, planning, implementation, and evaluation. When you're in that research phase, you're doing things like communication SWOT analyses, you're doing surveys of your different audiences, and you're really understanding the pain points from a communications perspective of the organization. And even if and the communications planning process is sort of designed to attach to any size organization, and you can do as much or as little of it as possible. So you could start off with baby steps in gathering insights that's going to make you much more confident and powerful when you have the kinds of conversations that we need to have with executives. I, as a consultant, even as an employee, if we're investing, because in order to properly pitch a story, you need photography, you might need B-roll, you might need a number of different, in order to decide whether or not it's worthwhile to make that kind of investment. I think it's so important to go through the process of communications planning. Otherwise, you could be spending money on activities that don't yield the results that you really need. And we all know, or we should know, that public relations is a marathon game. It takes time to build relationships with reporters. It takes time to build reputation. Only a second sometimes to lose it, which is, again, why it's so important to lean into our core values. But engaging in that process where you're doing the kind of research that you need to do so that when you step into a room with an executive, you are armed with the information that you need to explain to them why you are more than media, I think makes you is the way to do that. That's a much larger conversation as well, like digging into that communications planning process. But that's one of the ways that I don't think that people realize there's a framework and a method to our madness. And I think that when they understand that, they respect it. Every CEO that I've showed, and I go in with my, with my slide presentation and my graphics where I explain what the communications planning process looks like. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for development for us so that we can see ourselves beyond that role.
Yeah, I
Does that
totally
answer that
agree.
question?
I think it
What
does. I
is?
think it does quite well. We're getting some
And
claps here.
I will say also, like, and this is an even bolder statement to make, but if because I've had professionals like this in my corporate messaging program, if you know that you've got a much more strategic brain that is capable of looking at an organization from a macro level, and you're being confined into this box, it's still a buyer's market out there for employees. So, I mean, I know
That's
maybe
quite
that's
a
not,
hot take there.
maybe that's not the place for you. And I don't mean to be, well, I just think it's important to reassess.
Yeah, interesting take. Definitely. Yeah, so I think kind of like going off of that, we do need to find ways that we can, push the value messaging of whoever we represent in the most efficient way. And, of course, ESG is just one of those ways. The next way that we've been looking at is actually with DE&I. And so kind of switching tracks here, something interesting that we found is while ESG messaging is going up, DEI is going down. There's just less DEI happening. It's not that there's less DEI happening, there's less pitches that have something to do with DEI being opened.
Being opened. Okay.
Being opened, right. And so, we were just thinking, during our prep, I was telling Jennifer a little bit about myself again, that I used to be a senior editor. And for me, as a former journalist, especially, let's say I was a journalist today, and I see something that has ESG versus DE&I. Well, I already associate ESG with, okay, this is going to have something to do with investing. This is going to have something to do with markets. This is not only about, like, oh, look at how great and amazing our company is, but this is what it's going to do to the overarching market. And if I'm doing something with DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, if I'm doing something with DEI, well, like, okay, like it sounds like you're kind of pumping up your own story here. So, that's like kind of what I'm seeing from the journalist side, or what I would feel from the journalist side, that, SEG has a bigger part of this overarching financial story, whereas DE&I kind of maybe is a little bit more self-promotional. What does that sound like to you? And and another thing that and I'm going to add a corollary to this question, when I think of ESG, thank you. When I think of ESG, with that social part, I automatically think, okay, well, DEI is part of that. Is that actually the case, or would you say that they're two different things?
I mean, I don't know the real answer to that. I've never actually heard the two conflated, but so the ESG piece, we talked about this before, is an investment terminology that, and I'll say this as well, like, I know ESG is more talked about in PR circles outside of the US than in the US. Here we say things like CSR, corporate social responsibility. It's all the same thing. Are you being a great corporate citizen? Are you looking out for the environment? What is the stand that you're taking on these issues? And how might that, and then the question is, how might that impact whether or not people buy your stuff, whether or not people invest in your company? When you would be more, capable than I of explaining why the numbers are the way that they are, but I will offer my insight. I think that if you are pitching stories around diversity, equity, and inclusion, they must be first of all, they have to be they have to be news, right? There has to be some news behind it. And if you are drafting press releases for the purposes of getting the words out in SEO, and you're not getting the traction, I would say that there's an opportunity to explore how you can deepen the kind of pitching you're doing around these issues. And so again, I keep talking about core values. If diversity, equity, and inclusivity are key components of who you are as an organization, and you are now investing time, money, effort into reimagining your hiring practices, into reimagining your board selection process so that you are creating a more inclusive environment. If you are investing the time and talking to your employees about what would make them feel more included and connected to your organization, there are stories that can come from that. But I will also say that change in this way is also it will take time for organizations. There are a number of things that you can do today in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, in terms of hiring especially, but for new roles. But I just lost my train of thought here for a second. Yeah, sorry about that. So what I was going to say is that it's a marathon, and that it takes time for change to truly happen. And so this is what I was talking about earlier, that if you're pitching a story around DE&I, I'd be hesitant, because we know that things sort of upended with George Floyd's murder in 2020 in the States. And so if you're pitching stories about the progress that your organization has made, or the transformation that your organization has made, as an example, and as a result of doing whatever you've done, you've seen an increase in revenue or greater profitability. We know that diverse and inclusive organizations tend to be more profitable. There's a story somewhere in that. But if you're just, I don't know what these stories are that people are pitching, so I can't really say. But I will say that particularly with these stories, if your company isn't really about it and there's no substance behind what you're pitching, that could be why reporters aren't opening them. Oh yeah, here's another company saying they started a DE&I program. Well, so what? Like, what are the results of that program? How has it impacted not only your company, but the larger community? I think that looking for those connections, and especially connecting it to ESG, if those are the stories that are being, the pitches that are being opened more, I think is an opportunity for public relations professionals.
I totally agree with you, especially, with everything relating to what is the story. I think that we've all seen just kind of these fluff pieces of, oh, look at what we as a corporation are doing. But at the end of the day, you look and you talk to the actual people that work there, and it's just, oh no, that's just our marketing department. Nothing has changed since 1953. And I think that journalists have maybe, not only journalists, but consumers in general, they're not dumb. You could tell when something is kind of being shoved down your throat, or when I say shoved down your throat, right? when it's being disingenuous. When you have a truly diverse, equitable, and inclusive company, you can tell through the pitch, you can tell through the story that something truly is what it is. And I think that that's why, that's just my opinion, why DE&I pitching is kind of going down a little bit. But kind of transitioning away from DE&I and going to one specific niche that we looked at, which is pride. I think this kind of talks, you can kind of see this really clearly. So we have, so first of all, in 2022 or 2022, we've seen, more pitches than 2021. Between 2020 and 2021, poof, exploded. But what I think is interesting here is, if we go to the next slide, what I think is interesting here is looking at the month by month. So first of all, June, if you look at 2022's graph, June and May, obviously huge amounts of Pride pitching going around there. Obviously because June is Pride Month. And so, there are certain things that certain organizations might do that might seem a little bit disingenuous. I can tell you, for instance, here in Israel, I'll drive by the biggest Mazda dealership in Tel Aviv, and it'll be all decked out in rainbow pride flags and lights and whatever. You go to Ramallah, which is the capital of the Palestinian West Bank, and nothing. You go to you might, a corporation might say that they're, very gay friendly. They're proud of their LGBTQ plus community, but they don't offer parental leave for same-sex couples. I think it's something that's really interesting to see that not only, does this start ramping up the month of June of Pride Month, but also when certain other, events are happening. Something that I was talking to Jennifer about, again, during the pre-meeting was, well, of course, if the majority of people are on the platform that you're using, that you're getting this information from, are from the United States, of course, in January 2021, there's going to be a spike in Pride-related pitching because of the Supreme Court's decision to allow gay marriage federally. But what's interesting is that we actually have people, and as we can see in the chat, from all over the world. And this was something that was going on everywhere. So I thought that was actually really cool to see. But something that, I would really like to see more of, and I think that we could all use a little bit more help on, is really how can we be more, pardon the pun, but, truly show our true colors and be really not disingenuous, but really genuine in our pitching and in our stories. Not necessarily just for Pride Month, because it's just because it seems like there's a lot of disingenuity there, but just kind of across the board. And I think this also relates back to DEI and even ESG as well. Just how can we be more, how can we be more true to ourselves so that we can
I think, yeah, I'm not sure how to necessarily answer that, but I will say, it's okay to celebrate these months and to pitch stories around them. They just need to have deeper meaning if you want to, I think, if you want to get a reporter interested in them. I also don't believe that that's the only time that you should be pitching stories about LGBTQ issues and LGBT, I think that there are opportunities, again, with communications planning, to work into your planning a celebration of all that you are as an organization. And it could be things like, if you've got a gay executive or what, they don't have to announce them as, but including them as a part of your, putting, how do I say this? If the people from all of these different groups are truly a part of your organization, they will naturally be front facing in your organization, right? So, if the VP of sales just happens to be a Black woman, that's a great thing, and so she's gonna get coverage anyway. If you are truly an inclusive organization, and you are consciously inclusive in many different aspects of your organization, I think the deeper stories come naturally. That's just, and I don't know that you have to work that hard at it. The performative, throwing up the black square, throwing up the rainbow flag when there's not a lot happening throughout the rest of the year, I think you're right. I think people can tell when that's disingenuous.
Right. And it is our job as PR pros to really, we are the promotion in the media and otherwise for the organizations we represent. And, these are great things that our organizations have. I think that it would be great if we can all start, promoting things a little bit more just in a very genuine way. And just as you said, Jennifer, because the truth comes out, and when your truth is awesome, when what's going on in your organization is truly great, that shines through.
Yeah,
And
but
I
what's
think we
going
can.
on is actually being reflected outwardly. I mean, you will know this more than I. I only worked as a reporter for a tiny bit of time, but if someone pitched a story to me and I thought I might be interested, the first thing I'm going to do is look at their social media channels. I'm going to look at their website, and if I see that that you're regularly telling stories about the different people in your organization, I'm probably much more likely to be interested in your pitch if you're pitching a story to me about some huge impact that has happened within your organization as a result of your efforts in the area of DE&I.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that goes back to, just that seems to be, corporate corporate message or strategy building 101, right? That's, if you're doing it, just if it's in your strategy already, to succeed, and you're already doing this, and this is part of an overarching strategy, and it's clear, you're right. It is much more genuine than if it's just, oh, it's June, let's write something and see what happens.
Right, right.
So awesome. So that's actually, the crux of our conversation today. Thank you again, Jennifer, so much for this great conversation opportunity to get
Thank
your take
you.
on everything that we've had. Actually, so now let's open the floor up to a few questions. So, if anyone has some questions, feel free to drop them off in the chat.
Or
And
comments. I'm curious what
oh
people
yeah.
think, how, if they're pitching stories around ESG or DE&I, if you think what we've said that we're full of crap, like I'm curious what you I'd like to know people's comments as well. And while we're waiting for those, I will say that if you have questions about strategic communications planning or corporate messaging, feel free to reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I've been talking about this talk on LinkedIn. Maybe I'll put that in the chat as well. But
Yeah, definitely. So we do have one question. Without giving names, obviously, like what are some, of the disasters that you've seen, so that we can know what not to do?
some of
There's
the
no way, yeah, sorry.
disasters
Yeah, I
in
mean,
what's,
like let's say some like a some,
I
let's say that
mean,
there was something that went out that just completely flopped or actually blew up in the organization's face. What led to that and what caused that? Because we have to learn from our
well, I
mistakes,
mean,
right?
the most recent and most egregious and most glaring is the summer of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered and companies started putting up the black square without really being um, forward thinking and inclusive in their organizations. I actually had a number of companies call me because their employees sort of blew up. Like, I've been complaining to you about, discrimination and these issues for years, and you haven't responded. And they started having crises inside their organizations. That's some of the most recent examples. And they had to take a step back and sort of look at how authentically they truly were in areas of inclusivity. And as a matter of fact, before I even would make the decision to work with them, there are a number of key questions that I want answered to determine whether or not they're truly prepared to do the work. If and those aren't questions that can be answered immediately, like how much budget are you interested in devoting to this? Where are the true pain points in your organization and how can they be addressed? So it's a lot of work to do, but anyway, that's the most recent example I can think of.
Okay, thank you.
How do you
So we
craft
have a couple more questions coming at you from the crowd. So this is kind of a two-part question. One is, how do you craft the messages to be attractive for pitching? Which I would love. I think that we could both answer this question. And then I think the next question, if I'm not mistaken, it's what is your process for message analysis? And I think that's a question more directed towards Propel and how we're able to get the data.
Mhm.
So, if you want to, talk more about the ideas side, and then I can talk about, what we've seen in terms of
Right.
pitching, in terms of the data side, I think that'd be great.
So crafting compelling and persuasive messages starts with research. It starts with understanding the external and internal issues that are impacting the business. It starts with externally looking at what really from a media relations perspective, like what's being covered today, so that you can lend a unique and possibly different voice to the conversation. It involves understanding, and I say this way, but I mean it, like what keeps staff up at night about their work, what whether or not they see their work in the organization's larger goals, like how does what I'm doing impact the organization's larger goals, and can I tie them together? Looking at whether or not the company is doing a good job of communicating its core values and what it stands for. Understanding all of that will help you have a much clearer idea of the kinds of stories that you should be pitching. And again, when I talk about messaging, I'm talking about messaging that is used for everywhere an organization communicates, markets, or sells. So yes, with employee communications, yes, with donors and funders if you're a nonprofit, yes, with media for sure, but also marketing, also with your website, also with your social media. When you facilitate messaging sessions in the way that I've designed them and the way that I like to teach people to do, where you get key staff in the room together talking through how to talk about the best and brightest and most important of the organization and prioritizing that and agreeing, that's where you get those compelling messages.
Awesome. Amazing. Yeah. And, something that I spoke about on the last webinar, but I think it bears a little bit of mentioning here in terms, so that I think that's beautiful for the way that you get the ideas, and then putting it down in the pitch itself, which I'm hoping that I'm getting this right as well, if this is the answer to your question. So if you're sending a pitch, we found that the best way to send a pitch is to have it be no more than 150 words. If you have to go over around 200 words, try to break it up into small blocks. So maybe about 70 words maximum for that first paragraph, get the meat of it in the middle paragraph, and then in the last paragraph, have your call to action. Nobody wants to read a novel. If you read it, nobody wants to look at just like a giant block of text coming at them, because you might have the most beautiful, amazing idea in the world, but if you're pitch is physically unreadable, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to take it. So you can have done everything Jennifer just said and just write it in a format that is awful to read and automatically goes into the delete box. So keep it short, keep it sweet, get to the point quickly, and make it just easy on the eyes. And then the next question, which is about the process for message analysis, I believe that was also directed at us. So what we do at Propel is we anonymize and group the pitches that are sent via the platform. And from there, we're able to take data. We're able to take specific words from subject lines. We're not able to see subject lines, but we're able to see how many times a particular word or phrase was used in a subject line. We're able to see the numbers, the word counts of pitches in mass, not a specific one, but just in mass. But everything's anonymized, and that's how we're able to gather our data. So now we have time for one last question. It's kind of a two-parter, but I think they could both they both seem to meld well together. So the first thing is, can you speak a little bit more in depth about being an advisor to executives versus doing media relations? And then I think to kind of drive the point home, the very next, the corollary is, how do you manage dissenting viewpoints from key leadership figures in making decisions to make statements about key societal issues, either internally or externally? Is there a criteria, framework, or checklist you can suggest for what things a company should decide to comment on? For instance, geographically relevant? Does it affect members of the company only? Can the company actually affect the situation? Things like that.
Well, I think, I mean, you answered part of your question with those with what you've got in your examples. So in issues management, we know that we have to create for our organization a list of issues on which we will comment. Let me go back to the first question first. So about more in depth about being an advisor to senior leaders. I talked about this earlier, but what I have found is that PR folks tend to feel less confident about having those conversations. And I think it's because of a couple of things. One, there is a need for greater understanding of the communications planning process and the power of it to help us make more informed decisions and offer more informed counsel to senior leaders. And so and it's also about frameworks. So I could get into this in much more detail than the time we have for, but I will say this. In the Earn the Seat workshop that I do, I talk about 3 subtle shifts that we can make to get the ear of senior leaders, and they revolve around research. So understanding what's happening both inside and outside our organization and examining that by talking to staff, looking at consistency of messaging between what we're putting out on social media versus what's on our website or how we're communicating internally with our staff, looking at best practice case studies of other organizations, and then also developing talking points for ourselves that connect to the great research that we've done to help us provide that kind of counsel. It's really taking a macro view of the organization and taking yourself out of the particular story that you're pitching and looking more broadly at how the organization is communicating overall, how we're telling our stories, how engaged our employees are, how engaged our customers are. It's Todd, you asked, it's a much broader answer to that question, but those are a few different ways. And I hope that helps. And then, one of the things I do in my program is I role play, like we role play having the conversation. And I can't say that enough. I've been on boards before where we've role played, and I think it works really well. When we do the role plays on board development to tell the story of the organization and encourage funding. So what was the other? The other was, I'm kind of rushing through what I'm saying because we're running out of time. How do you manage dissenting viewpoints? Again, one of the ways that I do that is in a messaging session, because you've got those different leaders and a cross section of people from across the organization in the room together, and using a corporate messaging framework, you're talking through you're answering 5 questions. Who are we? What do we do? Who are we serving? Who are our customers? Why are we unique? Why should anyone care? And there's a process to asking and answering those questions that really uncovers the kinds of issues on which we should be speaking and on which we will take a stand or not. And so I will say that we often, we'll go to one leader and hear their thoughts. We'll go to another leader and hear their thoughts. And if they got dissenting viewpoints, we have to get them in the room together, guided by communications, to go through that process of answering those questions. I hope that helps. That's my short and sweet answer to that, Abby.
So, well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for coming on the webinar. I'm also going to promote a little bit too. I'm just going to drop that link one more time for the 15% off. In any case, Jennifer, thank you so much for coming. This has been a really enlightening conversation and a really fun and meaningful one as well.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
And thank you everyone for joining, and hopefully we'll see you all next time. Have a good one, everyone.